Welcome to Owner Insights, the podcast that uncovers stories about businesses and their owners. I'm James Orchard, Managing Director of the Crew Harris Orchard. In each episode, I sit down with a business owner to hear their stories. We discuss things like why they started their business, what was their motivation, the mistakes they've made, the lessons they've learned, keys to growth, and what they do differently. These aren't how-to guides or do-as-I-say tips, just real conversations between two business people. Join us as we explore what it takes to become a truly great business. Jim Whiting, formerly Managing Director of Badge Constructions, now Executive Chairman, I understand. Welcome at our firm. As you know, we're interested in finding out what makes businesses great and talking to people who we feel have great businesses, and you're certainly one of those. Badge Constructions is an Adelaide icon. It's a national business now. You can tell us how much it turns over and how many people it employs and all that sort of thing. But thanks for joining us this morning. Really looking
Glad
forward
to be here.
Yes, really looking forward to hearing your story. If it's okay though, I'd like to go back pre-badge days and ask you about your childhood and growing up. You've got quite an interesting story with your family, and it's relevant to Badge.
Yeah. Well, of course, putting that into it does put a bit of context around the Badge story. And, of course, I'm one of 8 boys, Adelaide born and bred. Part of the interesting story is that my father was one of 2 boys, and my mother was a single child. So, in other words, that meant 2 things. Mum went from being an only child to having 8 boys by the time they were 30, which makes most women these days weep or smile or do something. And Dad, of course, it meant he went through life never having to be anything other than a chauvinist, because he was one of 2 boys and he had 8 sons. So that sort of set the scenario. So they had 8 boys by the time they were 30.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at it from the point of view, by the time they were 40, my oldest brother John was 20.
Yeah.
So they had 8 boys between 20 and 10 to make it rough. So it was a fun place to be. And, Dad made the most of who's still alive. Dad, he made the most of being living in a boys' world, shall you say.
Yeah.
So we all lived at Somerton, where the family house still is. Mm-hmm. And, it was just one big game of sport, essentially. We all went to Sacred Heart. We all actually went to school at one time. Jack very kindly failed matric so that could happen. So there are photos floating around of all of us in the same school uniform, which when you think about it, that's pretty hard to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So, as I say, it was one big game of footy. I was talking on the weekend to my children. My wife and I, we have 4 kids. That, back in those days, it was a much, much simpler life. It sounds like an old bloke story because, for instance, nothing was open on Sunday. We would go to church and then you'd occupy yourself. Once again, you'd go out and you'd play, or you'd go to the Adelaide Hills and go and find somewhere to have scones and cream or dig up mushrooms or whatever. There was nothing open, which put so much less pressure on parents. Half the issue today is everything's open every day, so you got all these options. But that was the memories of Rymel Road.
Yeah.
Was all that sort of life. It was pretty simple.
So it was a pretty together family that occupied itself pretty much. Did you mix with lots of other families, or did you
we always
stick
thought
together?
Mum and Dad had a big house, and we always thought it was odd that other people would call in to see us and we'd never get an invite to see anyone else, because we thought, well, what's wrong with us guys? Well, of course, as you find out, thought of lobbing somewhere with 8 boys is probably not what you'd do, and we never did it.
Yeah.
I don't think I remember ever going to anyone else's house. I do, but it was very rare.
Wow.
And it was people you knew well.
Yeah.
Because you just didn't roll up with 8.
So was that because there were boys brawling with each other, or
No,
so you got on well together all over?
Yeah. There was never in the whole X number of years, there was never an argument of any description. The only argument was about football and cricket, plenty of that. Yeah. But in a more broad sense, no, everyone got on.
Yeah. So what do you think growing up with 7 siblings? What sort of influence did that have on your life after you left Bramwell Road?
Look, I think if you've got a lot of siblings, you don't get away with much. If you've got a lot of brothers, and you're all essentially once everybody was 15, everyone was sort of the same age. There was not a lot of difference between 20 and 30. It's not a disparity. So I don't think you get away with much. I think it's probably true today. Sadly, 3 of my brothers have passed away, but for the remaining 5 of us, I say you don't get away with much. There's not a lot of puffing up of your chest that goes on. That was always.
There's always someone there to pull you back down to earth.
That gets put into context pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I reckon that's the main thing is the reality of all that.
Yeah. So that egalitarianism, do you think that helped you when you got to leading a large business like you did?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. As it turned out in the evolution of Badge, if you like, which probably you'll get to, James, all those connections and all that certainly helped. I think it helps today. One thing all the family have got used to when you think about it, 8 boys in that period of time, and, if you work from a family point of view, anyone's friend is everybody's friend, and that's the way we've always worked. So you sort of end up with a lot of friends and acquaintances, and not many days go by where either I get confused for someone else or a friend of another brother who's got an intro to someone else. So it gave you a really big contact group, friend group, acquaintance group. That very much goes on today.
So you're number 4 out of 8?
Top of the middle.
Top of the middle. You better explain that.
Well, that was really a strategically important spot to be because Dad had to split, for instance, like camping trips and things, he had to have a cut-off. He had to split the big boys and the little boys.
Right.
Of course, I was the bottom of the big boys, which is a really good spot to be. Michael, who's top of the
Number
little
5.
boys, so he's the biggest little boy.
Yeah.
That's a bad spot to be because the biggest little boy he's been eternally pissed off about that. Still is.
And is that why Michael idolised number 1, Jack?
Could well be.
Yeah.
Could well be.
Yeah. So if we just skip then to the start of Badge, what was it, or how did Badge come about, and why on earth did you let your 7 brothers become shareholders with you?
Well, how did Badge come about? Well, I got a job, so I went to uni, did architecture for a year. That didn't really suit me. Had a year off, went and did building construction. It was called building technology back then. I'd sort of worked out earlier that the building industry suited what I liked. And I got a job in business management with a public company in Adelaide called Cowells, Cowells, which is no longer today, but it was in management. They were a conglomerate, and they had a steel division, a timber division, a hardware division, a home division, and a few others. And that was a really good background because you got experience in all of those. They, in about 1979, were taken over, a bit of a longer story, by Simpsons. And that sort of changed the dynamic quite a bit of that. I was enjoying that work. And then Simpsons were subsequently taken over by Email. And that really didn't suit those of us who were in the construction part of what was still Cowells. So what happened is 6 or 7 of us started Badge, and Badge is an acronym for Barry, Alan, David, Graham, Brian, and another Barry. And the J just didn't work. So didn't matter. We were just searching for a name. Someone came up with that.
Right.
So that's where Badge came from.
Yeah.
I had someone tell me not long ago that Badge stood for Building and General Engineering. I said, well, it's not bad. If we'd thought of that, we might
not
have
true,
got
but
it.
not bad.
Not true, but not bad.
Yeah.
But so that's where Badge came from. There were 2 parts of the business. There was a rural buildings business, which was part of what Cows did, and there was commercial construction. The rural buildings business got sold off after about 3 years because we didn't want to pursue that. And that left 3 of us, Jim, Alan and Barry, in the commercial part.
Right.
So that gets you to 1987 or 88. And then in 89 or so, we once again made a decision that Barry and Alan would leave. Hence, that's where the brothers came in. So we'd all had thirds of the business, and I suppose I put together the proposal for the brothers that I take half the business and they take half. And that's what happened in 89, and that's the way it is today.
Wow.
I've never wanted more of the business, and I've never wanted less.
Yeah.
And that's essentially how it is.
And what did the business turn over in 1989?
I suspect it was probably 5 million or something.
Okay. So a lot smaller than it is now.
Oh, yeah. We had 3 people.
Yeah.
We had 3 people. We were spending a lot of time interstate. And up at that point in time, we started our Brisbane office. I spent a lot of time in Brisbane. I lived up there for a while. And, essentially there was 3 of us probably for the first 3 or 4 years.
And what sort of work were you doing?
Well, commercial, industrial and food industry. We've always had a niche in the food game. But, as time went on, one of the brothers, for instance, John, started Ultratune, and we built a lot of their projects. The first one, and we were still doing a little bit of rural stuff and food stuff, and the first non-food or rural building we did was the Ultratune on Stevens Terrace.
Yeah, okay.
Still there. Still there.
My daughter goes there to get her car serviced.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that's a classic example of where the family helped. Jack was developing his business, and so we were designing and building and developing some of those, still own a couple. And, as I say, that's where the family helped.
Yeah. So that's an interesting segue. You've got 7 brothers who are shareholders. 2 of them are stockbrokers. One of them's a professional fisherman. He won't mind me saying that, will he?
He's a cockle salesman.
Salesman. And how did you delineate, or did you need to, between being a shareholder and being involved in decision making?
Well, I suppose I've always been right in the middle of it, and there was no concept, and none of the boys have ever been remotely interested in construction. They're interested in dividends, but they're not interested in construction. Well, they just weren't. They weren't those type of people. So there's never been any concept of me being other than the guy running it, as I still do today in a bit of a different form. So I don't know, James. I don't know that's ever occurred to me as something which needed to be.
Well, probably because you did have that clear delineation between becoming shareholders and management. I suppose I refer to a lot of clients where there's a real blurred line between management and ownership. So that must have been something that was helpful for you to not have to worry about, this brother saying that and that brother saying that about the way things were going. They were always just prepared to let you run with it. And as you say, just give us the dividends, Jim.
It's pretty simple. But I suppose, the way it was set up, probably with the help of your father at that stage, is it's set up with 2 shares, and I have one, and a family company of my brothers has one. So in other words, I don't deal with 7 brothers or their wives or their kids or their whatever. It's not set up though. So it was set up the correct way. So there is no concept of people. They have a representative on the board. If they've got a problem, they can go and speak to Charlie, and Charlie can come and speak to me. It's worked well from day one.
So Charlie represents the other seven. Yeah.
It's not that we don't, not that I might not talk to them about what's going on, but by and large, if there is an issue or something that needs to come up, it'll come through Charlie.
Yeah. So 1989, we're turning over about $5 million doing commercial industrial work, just done an Ultra-Dune shop, gone to Brisbane. Why did you feel the need to go interstate? Why not just stay in Adelaide and dominate the Adelaide market?
Sometimes I ask that question. Well, we had a very good client, Ingham's. Obviously, in the food business, and I'd have to say that relationship really was clearly the most pivotal one for us. We did a lot of work for them. They went public maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and things changed, although we still do quite a bit of work for them. So we essentially followed them to Brisbane. They had, and we worked for them in a bit of a different capacity we do today, but essentially I was following a client. So we've been in Brisbane for a long time, and to some degree we followed them to Perth, perhaps in the late 90s, 25, 26 odd years ago. But, you know, that's a pretty usual story. Businesses often have sort of followed clients, you call it. But Brisbane has changed so much. I actually had worked in Brisbane back in the Cows days, because Ingham's actually were a client of Cows's, but Cows, and they chose to come across with us. Another story. But, you know, so we knew Brisbane, and if anybody who's been in Brisbane back in early 80s, it has changed so much. I mean, it was a pretty hick place back then. And they've done a fantastic job of how they've developed it. So, you know, all the growth, if you took the view that Adelaide might not be big enough, you just need to have an office in Brisbane, because all the growth you want will be in Brisbane.
Yeah. And that's where Ingham's happened to go.
Yeah. Well, they were already there, but they were expanding.
Yeah.
And they were in the middle of turning chicken from a generic whole chicken product into coating it with breadcrumbs, essentially, you know, all the stuff they do now. And so we went through that growth spurt with them. And a lot of the growth of the company in the next 15 years followed their growth in simple terms. You know, it by all means wasn't all our turnover, but it was A, interesting work, and B, they were on a growth spurt, and we had to pedal hard to keep up.
So let's go. Let's roll forward. 2024. What do you turn over now, and how many people do you employ, and in what locations?
Well, we operate in Perth, Adelaide, Victoria, Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, the Gold Coast, but we also are working in Sydney. So, you know, we're a national operation, and we have a Indigenous partnership, which essentially we run in Darwin.
Right.
But we're also working in all sorts of other spots. So, look, it is a national operation. Our turnover is about 450 million, and we directly employ 300 people. But, of course, as I say to my guys, you know, we do every year in the first week of June, we do a census. In other words, we count everybody who's on our sites. And what I say to our people, and that's usually about 2,500, I say, well, they're on our sites every day, so we're responsible for their safety. We're responsible for the product. We're responsible for paying them. I said, so really you've got to think of those people as our employees. Anything happens to them, it's our problem. We're responsible for the financial outcome, etc. So we directly employ 300, but every day on sites we'll have a couple of thousand people, or 2,500 on our projects. Yeah, and we've got to manage them.
Yeah. So it's become quite a big business. Did you always want to get this big, or what was it that actually was there a pivotal moment in the 90s or any other time where you said, I want to get big, or did it just happen?
Look, I'd have to say it just happened. I don't. There's all those cliches, standing still is going backwards and all that, and there's truth in that. But I've never really, and you've heard me say before, James, we're a very profit-focused mob. It's the leftover, not the turnover, to use that saying.
I have heard that a few times.
Have heard that. And that's it. And I really have never cared for the megalomania part of construction. The game is dominated a bit by people who see size as the be-all and end-all. It's not. We've always been focused on the profitability. There's a reality to getting big. There's a reality to catering for your employees' ambitions, and those realities mean you probably do have to grow. But there was never a pivotal moment. We've made a couple of acquisitions, one on the Sunshine Coast. The Sunshine Coast office I talked about has really helped. Great mob of people there, has really helped. But no, I've never really had the view. I don't have a view today that I want to get more profitable. I want to get a better return. It has been a tough period for builders, but I don't have a view on wanting to be bigger.
It's really interesting that you're honest enough to say that you want to focus on profit. A lot of corporates these days are very careful about saying that, and they want to trumpet a whole lot of other things. How do you get more profitable?
Commercial buildings it's a risky business. No one would say it wasn't. And often our profitability is defined by how bad your bad jobs are, as opposed to how good your good jobs are. We've always had good clients and done some good work, and we've always had a pretty good level of contribution out of our projects. Now, what tends to happen, particularly as you get bigger, inevitably, it gets eroded by your worst jobs. So it often comes back to how bad your worst jobs are. So the answer to being more profitable is to get better at making sure you don't have the bad jobs. Really, because even if we beat ourselves up sometimes and we go back and analyse all this, and that's the conclusion. And most of the time our pain is self-inflicted. There's things we didn't do very well. So I think the answer to be more profitable, just be better at what you do.
So you've been doing it 40 years. How can you do bad jobs still?
Well, things like COVID and all this sort of stuff, circumstances conspire against you a bit.
Yeah.
We had some pretty significant projects on, to use that as an example. It's not only a COVID, and so the guys, you can't use COVID as an excuse, but sometimes circumstances conspire against you. For instance, and often one of the things that costs us a lot of money is subcontractor insolvencies. Now, we check that, they've got to go through this, we've got to go through that, but you get a subby going insolvent towards the end of a project, it can be a really painful exercise. And we're caught in this spot.
Yeah.
Now, getting better means doing more homework on those people, particularly the critical people.
Yeah.
Getting better means managing it so you're not in that spot. So look, I'm not saying we always have negative projects or bad projects, but as I say, over the years, often it's defined by your profitability by that.
So can I be so bold as to ask why you want to make more profit? What do you do with the money? What do you enjoy in life?
Now, the brothers aren't listening to this, are they?
Probably not.
No, right, okay, well, I assume that. Look, we build up, as you know, James, we build up a good balance sheet over 40 years, and I've always had the view that happiness for a builder is a lazy balance sheet, because you will have situations where you need to use it. So we probably got where we want to be in that regard. Well, I want to get a return on that balance sheet. It's not there for fun. And to be fair to the other shareholders who aren't listening, they want to get a return on it too. It's not there to be.
So there's almost an innate competitiveness about doing well financially as opposed to buying boats and stuff like that.
Absolutely. The business has always been separate. We're in the business of we're building contractors. We don't own plant and equipment. We follow the model that we contract everything out, and our business is putting together a whole lot of contracts to make a bigger contract. So, I think we've always been focused on profitability, and going forward as executive chairman, that's what I'm going to be focused on.
Terrific. If you were 30 again, what would you tell yourself to do differently, or about your risk profile? What would you go back and change, if anything?
Well, when I was 30, I suppose we were 4 or 5 years into the badge journey. In those first 4 or 5 years, back when we had the rural guys, what actually happened in 83, there were all the bushfires around Adelaide. So the rural buildings business was absolutely chock-a-block, replacing a lot of them. And the first year I spent basically on a forklift, because that's what we needed. Yeah. It was good fun, actually, down at Gilman. So I use that to explain that it has evolved. I said to you earlier, there was no epiphany or whatever. Would I have done anything different at 30? I don't think so. We had 4 young kids at that stage. So, Bron did all the work. I was very lucky to have a partner who did, a wife, who did exactly everything that needed to happen in that space. I don't think I actually took the kids to school once. I took one to school once.
Jim. Not that people could actually watch this.
Not that that's a badge of honour or anything. I'm just saying I was free to do what we had to do in the business. Yeah. That was the point.
Yeah.
So, James, I don't think there's anything I'd.
So any mistake that you remember along the journey?
It's that difference between mistakes and regrets. I sort of don't have any regrets, but I make plenty of mistakes. Got to make more good decisions than mistakes. As I say, there's lots of mistakes. Are there any regrets? Well, I don't think there's any regrets. My only regrets I always sometimes think are how we deal with people. That's the only thing I regret in 40 years, and I don't think we've ever treated anyone consciously badly. But I think if you say, well, what are your regrets? I'd say, well, we could have handled that better. From an operational point of view, we make lots of mistakes, like the story with subcontractors. So, I don't spend a lot of time. I've never spent a lot of time thinking of in that way.
Jim, you talk about care for your employees, safety on site, all of those things that building unions would want to hear you talk about, and you talk about profit as well. So to me, you're a really well-rounded business person who takes care of operations really well, but also focuses on the fact that you want to do well and make some profit as well. So thanks for coming and talking to us this morning. It's a magnificent story, frankly, I think, and it's been great to hear from you. So thanks very much.
I've got a lot more to talk about, James.
Oh, what else have you got? Keep going.
Don't you want to hear some more?
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. All right, no, good fun to be here. I mean, I was thinking, just to add a bit to it, how long I'd been connected with you guys, and I think your father is the only accountant I'd ever had. So I think the first time I got an accountant was with Roger.
Well, it's very nice of you to say that, Jim. I wasn't going to talk about myself or our firm, but seeing as you've raised it, Dad was really lucky to have you and John and Charlie and all the Whiting boys come along, and they all did things, and that's the key in our business, is you've got to have clients who do things, and they take risks and they grow businesses, and all 8 of you did something at some point and are still doing things. So that was a really good start for Dad's client base, was to have 8 come along out of the Shop Football Club and do things, and the firm sort of grown from there. So don't underestimate the influence of the Whiting boys on our firm for 1 minute. I'm sure you don't. But,
I certainly don't.
Yeah.
Okay, good fun.
Good run. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Cheers.